Right.
Hello, everyone. I am Kenny Coogan, the Education Director of the International Carnivorous Plant Society, and happy World Carnivorous Plant Day. I hope you are enjoying our free resources that we are publishing throughout the day on our YouTube and Facebook pages. Carson Trexler, the Conservation and Research Director of the International Carnivorous Plant Society, and I have had a lot of fun curating today's presentations. We are now joined by Dr. Leslie Bradbury and Dr. Rachel Wilson, Professor and Associate Professor of Science Education in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at the Appalachian State University, located in the beautiful North Carolina mountains in the United States. Dr. Bradbury and Dr. Wilson, welcome to the inaugural World Carnivorous Plant Day 2021.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
We're very excited. I invited you here because of your lesson plan, Capturing Insects and Student Interest. This lesson was created for first graders to learn about unusual plants in their area and a multimodal investigation of carnivorous plants. The lesson PDF will be in the description box below. Dr. Wilson, can you tell us about the origin of this lesson?
Yes, so Dr. Bradbury and I live and teach in a state in which many species of carnivorous plants grow. It's one of the few states that is home to the Venus flytrap, and we thought it would be very interesting to the students in the public schools to learn about these specific plants. And we were looking at the lesson standards related to plants and how they grow in particular soils. And so that's how we came up with the idea.
Very good. Dr. Bradbury, can you walk us through the first day of the lesson? My hope is that teachers that are watching will be able to implement this.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So on the first day, what we did is we were trying to get the students interested and engaged in the lesson. So we started by asking them if they believed there were any plants that could eat animals. And some of them were already familiar with Venus flytraps and said, yeah, absolutely. And others said, absolutely no way. There's no way that there are plants that can eat animals. So they were really excited when we said, well, guess what? We have some of those plants here and we're going to get to investigate them today. And so we had worked with the Carnivorous Plant Nursery, which is located in Maryland. So we reached out to them with our idea, and they made suggestions for the specific species of Venus flytrap, pitcher plants, and sundew that we ordered. So we had those available, and we asked the students to draw them and then label their drawings. And really, that took with first graders the whole first day of our lesson, but they were really excited.
Very good. And then Dr. Wilson, what happened after the first day?
So after they had made their initial observations and figured out what they thought the plants used to capture the insects, we had a series of centers that we created with their classroom teachers, and the kids rotated through those centers on the second and third day of the unit. So we just didn't have enough time to get every kid through every center. But the centers that we did during that first year that we wrote the article about were based on the teachers' literacy centers. So they would do these literacy centers every day, and then we just took kind of the basic activities that the teachers would do, and we used the topic of carnivorous plants. So the teacher had a center that they led with a book that was above the reading level of the kids. And she would read the book chapters related to the plants that we had in the classroom and talk with the kids about what they were finding out from this informational text. Then we had another informational text with photographs about different carnivorous plants, and we modified those to make reading comprehension sheets that the kids could do in a center on their own. And we also had a center that Dr. Bradbury or I would sit at, and we would have the plants at the center for the kids to look at again, and they would get to write, observe and write about their favorite plant of the 3 that we were looking at. And then we had a 4th center where we had created basically a web page. It's called a board in the article because that was the name of the web page in the system that the teachers were using. But it's essentially just a web page, and we had photographs, up close photographs of the different structures of each of the 3 plants. We had maps for where these plants could be found in our state. We also had video clips of the plant capturing an insect, which is what the kids wanted to watch over and over and over again. You know, they weren't seeing the plants capture insects in their classroom, but we could watch the video as many times as they wanted. And so they would observe what specific structures the plants would use to capture the insects and how they were similar and different from each other. And so the kids spent time in each center. And then, so that took 2 days for 1st graders.
Yeah, very good. I love a station rotation. It's a lot of, work before the kids get there, but then during the lesson, you can really interact with the kids and supervise and assist where needed. So,
and just one thing to know, Kenny, is we've been doing this now for several years, and so we've made a few changes since the initial implementation that we wrote about in the article that you're referencing. So one thing that we have done is there was a center where the kids looked at different kinds of soil, and we've taken that one out, and we replaced it with a center with homemade Play-Doh, and the kids would take the homemade Play-Doh and actually make a model of each one of the carnivorous plants that were in our unit, and they've really enjoyed that activity. And as teachers, it's really helpful for us to see what they understand by looking at what they construct and then having them tell us about what they've made with the Play-Doh. So we feel like that's been a really good change that we've made.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Bradbury, can you tell us how the lesson culminates at the end of the week?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So after the kids have done all of the stations, we come back together and do sort of a whole class review of the structures of each one of the plants and how they captured the insects. And we watch the videos again because the kids wanted to watch them again. And then once we had finished that review, we did a modeling activity with the kids on how to write like a scientist. So what would happen is always the Venus flytraps were the favorite. So we wanted the kids to do that one kind of on their own. So we chose the sundew to model with them, making a science drawing, reviewing what the structures were with the sundew and what process they used to capture the plant. And we provided the kids with sentence stems that said, the sundew has blank and blank, so that they could list different structures. And then the next sentence stem would say, these characteristics allow the sundew to, because we wanted to see if the kids could put the process with the parts, like how were the plants actually capturing the insects. And then their last stem was, I think it's cool that the sundew, and they could say whatever they wanted for that one. So we modeled that on one day, and then on the next day the kids made their own drawing and sentence stem completion for the Venus flytrap. And so that was kind of the end of our unit.
Gotcha. So Dr. Wilson, I'm going to ask you how you could level up this lesson and expand it, to other teachers. And as you do that, I'm going to get my Play-Doh clay version of carnivorous plants.
Wonderful.
don't know this, but I published a TED Ed talk on carnivorous plants.
No.
Animation. So adults can model carnivorous plants in that form. So Dr. Wilson, can you tell us what your suggestions are for other grade levels?
Yes. So one of the things that we were trying to accomplish in this unit was to use multiple types of representations of carnivorous plants, their structures and their function in the unit, and that would be appropriate for any grade level. So for instance, we've used homemade Play-Doh to help fourth graders model other organisms' structures, to think about how those structures are related to function. And the older students like it equally as much as the first graders, because I think it allows them to really closely observe the organism and then think about how to represent it themselves. And they don't get caught up in whether or not they're a good artist. You know, some kids are like, well, I don't like to draw. Or they don't get caught up in whether or not they can write. You know, school is very text-based sometimes, and so this gives them another opportunity to represent their understanding. And so a study of carnivorous plants could be used to think about adaptations, and often that's in a higher grade level than first grade, teaching about adaptations. And carnivorous plants offer such a unique perspective on thinking about how structures allow organisms to do particular things that other organisms can't do. And so these unique structures that carnivorous plants have evolved to adapt to environments with low nitrogen soils is really unique. And so that could be used in studies with teachers for adaptations, which are often at higher grade levels. And they could just do more in-depth research and more in-depth representations of their understandings than we were able to accomplish with first graders.
Yeah, as a middle school science teacher, everything you say, I feel like my middle schoolers would be fully engaged and would love all those things. So here's my little Venus flytrap.
Yay!
A lot of times I definitely play my TED Ed talk about carnivorous plants. It's called like the wild world of carnivorous plants. And my students, I always ask them, how big do you think the claymation is? Because, you know, it's really zoomed in, but this is as big as the Venus flytrap is. The little teeth are made out of toothpicks, and then there's wire hinges to make it
awesome.
Open and close. And then we have a little Sarracenia.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
I feel like we're behind the blind here, like in The Wizard of Oz, revealing all the secrets.
Wow.
Oh my goodness.
They got eaten. And this is a corkscrew plant. And I love carnivorous plants that have their traps under the soil.
Mm-hmm.
Because I understand that first graders love that plants you can see the action of the traps moving. But I think it's even more interesting, especially for older kids, that they're looking at this beautiful plant, beautiful flowers, and then the dangerous part is under the water, under the soil.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I think I really like the idea of using carnivorous plants in a unit on adaptations, because I think kids have been exposed all of their lives to ideas of animal adaptations, but they're way less familiar with the idea that plants also have adaptations that help them survive. And so I think it's such a cool and interesting way to bring that idea to kids in a way that they'll remember.
Mm-hmm.
are you familiar with scholastic study jams?
Only marginally, yeah.
Yeah.
They're maybe 3 to 4 minute long cartoons, and they specifically have one on animal adaptations, and then they have a whole other video about plant adaptations.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they show like how aquatic plants don't have rigid stems, so when the water's moving, they don't snap. And then they also talked about plants that have to go into dormancy and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
which is great to expose to elementary students, but my middle school students definitely grasp it in the cartoon format. Dr. Wilson, do you have a favorite fact you learned about carnivorous plants?
Well, I would say one of the favorite facts that the kids really latched onto was this idea of how many times a trigger hair would have to be activated in order for the trap to close. So they wouldn't often communicate it in their writing because, you know, first graders are just learning to write, but they would tell you, oh, an insect has to touch one trigger hair 2 times or 2 different trigger hairs in order to get the trap to close. And they just were so fascinated with that fact. And so I have to say their enthusiasm transferred to me.
Yeah, Venus flytraps can count.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Dr. Bradbury, do you have a favorite fact that you took away from this lesson?
Well, that was my favorite one too, because the kids loved it so much. But the other thing that was my favorite was just learning about sundews. I mean, we learned so much about the different carnivorous plants in order to prepare the unit to work with the kids. But obviously I knew a little more about Venus flytraps than any of the others. So I loved the sundew. I just think they're so beautiful. And so to know that they exist and how they function was great. I really enjoyed learning that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in your area you have great native carnivorous plants. And around the world, there's between 750 and 800 species. And whenever I start a presentation, I ask the audience to list all the carnivorous plants they know. And we usually get up to about 3, 4.
Mm-hmm.
So in that light, can you, either of you, tell me why we should be celebrating carnivorous plants today on World Carnivorous Plant Day?
Well, go ahead, Dr.
No, you go ahead.
I think in general, plants are often overlooked, and we don't often appreciate what they're contributing to our environments. And so in general, I think plants deserve a lot more appreciation and gratitude than we often bestow upon them in terms of our attention. We have a lot of attention for charismatic megafauna, right? But not a lot of attention for things that don't appear to move. And so in general, I think carnivorous plants are a wonderful example of the biodiversity of plants on the planet and how they are specially adapted for their environment and what niche they're occupying in their particular habitat. And I think they're so fascinating because they have these unique structures that allow them to do things that other plants, you know, do in other ways. But I think just their position in the biodiversity of the planet is really fascinating.
Dr. Bradbury?
Yeah, I would just echo what Dr. Wilson said. I just find them to be incredibly fascinating. And to think that we have this category that we call carnivorous plants, but within that there are so many different ways that the carnivorous plants go about capturing their prey, that it's just really interesting to recognize how many diverse ways that there are.
Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite things to share is that carnivory in plants has evolved multiple times in multiple places on multiple genera and groups of plants.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, you think about the mechanism of pitcher plants, right, versus a Venus flytrap or a sundew or a bladderwort. I mean, they're all operating in such different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very fascinating. So Dr. Wilson and Dr. Bradbury, thank you so much for sharing your lesson. The lesson plans are in the description box below. To learn more about the International Carnivorous Plant Society, you can check out our link also in the description box below. And thank you so much, and happy World Carnivorous Plant Day.
You too.
You too.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.